My name is Jessica Berwick. I'm a hospitalist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston with a focus on medical student education, clinical skills development, and professional identity formation. And to explain how I ended up here in front of you, I am Dawn's daughter. A few months ago, as we sat in the living room of my parents' home after dinner one evening, my father casually out loud said, as though to no one in particular, they asked if a family member might want to introduce me at the IHI forum this year, expecting me to say, that's interesting, want to watch a movie? Or pretend I didn't hear him, as I have done on nearly every other occasion he has proposed that I share his platform with him in any way. But something clicked, and this time I said, yes, I think I'd love to. Oh, should we just give the talk together? And here we are. Anyone could introduce Dawn Berwick here at the IHI Forum. Indeed, at least 30 times someone other than me has introduced him at this event. His accomplishments are many. His impact on American healthcare and in a few other countries is impressive. He is quite successful, professionally speaking, and you don't need me to tell you that. In preparation for this introduction, I asked him to send me his CV. It's overwhelming, and I will now read it to you. Just kidding. So instead of introducing Dr. Dawn Berwick, a pediatrician, the founder of IHI, a leader of the healthcare quality improvement movement, former CMS administrator, candidate for governor of Massachusetts, and knight commander of the most excellent order of the British Empire, I'll just introduce my dad. He grew up as the eldest of 3 sons with a doctor father, as you may recall from prior speeches, and a mother who by all accounts was warm and loving. I never got to meet her. She died from cancer when my dad was 15 years old. She was, unsurprisingly, a major force, as I understand it, in the extraordinary person he is now. My dad has 3 brothers. My parents met in their undergraduate chemistry class, so cliched, but only started dating years later. My dad has 4 kids, although you should all know that he once said on a live radio interview that he has 2 kids. There are 4 of us. There is Ben, then Dan, then me, then Becca. You've met some of them in his prior speeches. Under my mother's influence, my dad became an avid hiker, and my parents took us all over the world in pursuit of the best hiking. My childhood was filled with time in the mountains with my family, swimming in perfect mountain lakes, backpacking in remote landscapes north of the Arctic Circle, and with humor, heated intellectual debates, and limitless love and support. It was, by any measure, pretty great. He's now a grandfather to 8 grandchildren, including my 2 children, Nathaniel, who's 15 years old, and Zoe, who's almost 8. Who is my father in the context of my family? Well, it's hard to capture in words or stories, but let me at least try to sketch it out with a few specifics. He is terrified of scary movies, but he loves to watch them. This apparent contradiction is illustrated by the time he started watching The Mothman at our old house in New Hampshire, which was a little house in the woods with a large glass window next to the television, perfectly placed for the maximum jump scare effect. My mother and I were both just upstairs, 20 feet away, when I heard, Jessica, don't you want to come watch this movie with me? He's very funny, and my childhood memories are full of laughing to the point of crying, that kind of laugh that fills everyone up. He is the most generous person I know. As kids, my dad was around for all of us, always. He has a policy of always answering our phone calls, even if he was mid-speech or in the process of being knighted. Just to illustrate the point, I want you all to know that just yesterday, he casually mentioned to me that he might not be able to answer his phone from 3:30 to 4:30 because he'd be on stage with Dr. Anthony Fauci. But if I did really need him, I should just call twice. There's a running joke in my family that my dad has a severe case of FOMO, fear of missing out. His FOMO, I believe, is driven by the joy he finds in connection and community. He sees the best in everyone, assumes every single person brings the best intentions and reacts to them from that starting place. He instilled in me the sense the world was not different for me as a girl. He never expected me or asked me to be different from my brothers. I can't recall a single time that he distinguished me from my brothers on the basis of my gender. Later in my life, I discovered that not everyone would see things the way he did. He gives the best advice. He sees nuance and complexity and is perhaps the most skilled navigator of humans I have ever met. He wants to learn all the time. It's exhausting. I have stopped asking him what book he's currently reading, which is a common practice in my family for everyone, because the answer is too often something about trying to master quantum physics. I'm not kidding. He loves the mountains. He learned that from my mother. My parents took us to the most spectacular places on the planet, all 4 children to be in the mountains. I have this memory that collapses so many moments of arriving exhausted to camp, and my father setting up a big pot of water to boil to feed all 4 of us the most delicious bowl of spaghetti we had ever eaten. He's ambitious. The recurring theme in the mountains was being so tired, hiking so far and so high, and my dad saying, "I'm just gonna climb that next peak. I'm going to the top." While my mother, contented by the hard work we had done and by the bliss of being in that place, would soak in the sun while my dad proved, to who, that he could get to the top. It is my honor now to welcome my dad, or as you know him, Dr. Don Berwick, to the stage.
Well, the first note you should take is that if you want your head to swell, get your daughter to introduce you. Thanks so much, Jessica. It's really my honor to introduce Jessica to you in person. My 3rd child, physician, mentor to developing professionals, partner, parent, and now my neighbor, because my wife Ann and I have last month moved from our suburban home of 45 years to a newly renovated home next door to Jessica and her family, and close by Jessica's sister Becca and her family. And so our lives are full now, people dropping in to watch Celtics games, share dinners, and so much more. I don't want to use all of our time talking about Jessica. Actually, I do want to use all of our time talking about Jessica. But I will give you a glimpse of her that I think encapsulates some of what you want to know about her. When Jessica was 15 years old, I had already climbed Mount Rainier near Seattle a couple of times. But Jessica and I talked, and she thought she might want to have a go, 15 years old. So we did, actually twice, because the first time we summited, it was a whiteout, and we had no views. So the next year we went back and had beautiful views. My story is from the first try in the whiteout. Mount Rainier's summit is 14,411 feet above sea level. At that level, the partial pressure of oxygen is 50% of sea level. The mountain's slopes are very heavily glaciated, and they're laced with crevasses, and you have to use crampons and ice axes and ropes to climb. They're essential. At 12,500 feet on Rainier, you reach the top of a rock outcropping, which is called Disappointment Cleaver. The name tells the story. It's a place a lot of people turn around. Above that, it's just glaciers all the way to the summit. On our first try, we reached the top of Disappointment Cleaver, and our guide, Dave Hahn, who had summited Everest a number of times, spoke to us with real serious tone. He said, "Heavy weather's moving in, and if we go now, we can make it to the summit, but we cannot stop to rest along the way. It'll have to be steady, 2,000 feet vertical of climbing without stopping. Or we can descend now, have hot chocolate, and try again some other time. Dave said, Jessica, what would you like to do? Jessica didn't hesitate for a microsecond. She said, let's do it. And 15-year-old Jessica went to the top. That's Jessica in a nutshell. This is us at the summit in the whiteout. And that determination has marked every step of the way for her. It helps make her a real steel beam in our family, a deeply caring parent and partner, and in my opinion, a world-class doctor, as I think you'll soon hear. Her patients and her colleagues are lucky to have her. I know they are. This is us approaching the summit the second time in the clear skies and long distance views.
And the next, if you would just advance,
I
then everybody will get to see
Jessica insisted I show you this
'cause
picture.
I thought you should all see that. You're welcome.
Okay, so why are we here? So in the world, I'm going to get this picture off there. So in the world of quality, there's a phrase, a really important one, go to the Gemba. If you want to understand what's going on as a predicate to gaining the knowledge to improve, go where the work happens. Get out of your office. Become proximate to the work that's going on. And that's sort of the theme for Jessica's joining me today. Here, the Gemba came here. Jessica deals every day of her work with a whole system we are trying to make better. And we need her to tell us some truth, I think. So, Jessica, may I call you Jessica?
Please, please. Can I call you Dad?
Say more about why you decided to say yes now. This isn't the first time I asked you.
Yeah, you have invited me to participate in a lot of activities over the years. And I think the first 3 reasons are pretty boring reasons. One is that my work centers around direct patient care and medical education. You are macro. I am micro. Our missions are obviously related, but I approach it from a very different angle. And I'm not trying to make my career be your career. Which leads to a second reason, is that I don't feel entitled to this platform. This is the product of the work that you have done and you created, and these people came to work with and learn from and hear from and collaborate with you, not me. Third is, I have worried that my being critical of the system might ever reflect badly on my colleagues or on my bosses. This is connected directly to how much respect I have for my clinical supervisors. Dr. Melissa Madison, my direct supervisor, Dr. Josh Matley, Dr. Katrina Armstrong, and now Dr. Jose Flores, who always, always center the patient. And they know that by listening to and valuing the frontline clinicians, you're also improving the care of the patient. None of the problems that I recognize in my daily work reflect their leadership. And the same is true in my medical education work. My supervisors are brilliant, supportive, dedicated, extraordinary educators and mentors. So I never want anything I say about the system or the challenges of the work to reflect badly on any of them. The fourth reason, though, is a little more personal, and I suppose a little more layered, which is that I think you walk on water. I always have, and I still do. I admire you more deeply than I could ever articulate. And I don't think you're always right in everything, and I don't really want to say that out loud. Not because I think you'll be upset with me, I know you won't be, but because sometimes it's hard for me to acknowledge to myself that sometimes I disagree with you. But I think we all need to grapple more explicitly and intentionally with these harder conversations. And I trust that just as we have had some of these hard conversations on our walks in the woods in New Hampshire, we can have productive and constructive dialogue here.
Me too. So we're gonna get into some heavy material stuff that's wrong, including stuff that I helped make wrong and my generation helped make wrong. Before that, let's go to a high point though. How do you like being a doctor?
I love being a doctor.
Why?
What an extraordinary privilege. It's, I've told you, I mean, you asked me this question before we came on stage, and immediately I can think of like 20 reasons, stories, illustrations. But one is that very recently, when I was last on service, I was taking care of a woman in her 60s with trisomy 21 who needed a cardiac catheterization. She spoke quite loudly, and so you could always hear her talking to people as you walked through the halls. She was very clear that she was very scared of the cardiac catheterization. She knew that it needed to be done, and she understood why, and she wanted to do it, but she was really terrified. She said, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. Tell me I'm doing great. I said, you're doing great. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah, you're doing great. She said, okay, are you proud of me? Tell me that you're proud of me. I said, I'm so proud of you. We're all so proud of you. You're doing great. She said, okay, I just want someone to hold my hand while I go to the cath lab. Then I said, of course. And then I got to be the person who held her hand as she went downstairs to the cath lab. And to say to her the whole way down, you're doing great. You're doing so great. We're so proud of you. And then when we got to the holding area before her cardiac cath, to tell the whole team, terrific team of people waiting to receive her, it really helps her to say, you're doing great, we're so proud of you. Just so you know, pass that along. It just, what a privilege.
Just lucky to have you. All right, so let Jessica and me give you a little bit of a framework of what we're going to do in the next 35 minutes and 54 seconds. So we already did introductions. We're going to cover basically 4 topics. The first big chunk is context of work. I graduated from medical school in 1972, Jessica in 2010, 38 years apart, and a lot has changed about context. And we want to interrogate a little bit, what are those changes, what are those changes and how they'd affect the work, especially Jessica's work today. We'll call that context of work, and there are 3. We decided we talk about 20 things, but the 3 things we're going to talk about is money, and its role in our work and our efforts to be the people we want to be. Systems barriers, which is, of course, bread and butter for the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, but I want to hear the nature of that at the Gemba, where Jessica meets the work. And then finally, Jessica's pointed out to me that one of the big differences today is epidemiologic. I certainly had patients who were abused substances, usually alcohol, and alcoholism was part of my life. But this wave of opioid use disorders is way beyond anything I ever confronted. And Jessica, in our preparations, has educated me to what that means for her work and how that is different, which will echo back to the first 2 topics of financialization and corporatization of healthcare and systems barriers. That's chunk 1. Chunk 2 will be a deeper dive into culture, the culture of medicine, the culture of generations, generational change, where I think we're going to hear more from Jessica, I hope, about what she thinks my team got wrong. And therefore, the last section, so what? What do we need to change? Really, I think a series of asks to you about maybe calibrating the way you think about what's going on in this new era of medicine, and perhaps even then getting to a couple of specific asks. Actually, spoiler alert, I'll give you 1 ask, but I won't tell you yet what it is. So Jessica, let's start with context. I want to give a little bit of preamble here. A close friend of ours, who you know, found himself a few weeks ago, or maybe months ago, waking up in an emergency room after his first grand mal seizure, disoriented, not knowing how he'd gotten there. And he spent the next 24 hours in the emergency department on a stretcher, on a bed, with almost nothing happening. Some tests done, people cycling in and out. He's being confused. He didn't know what was going, really what was going on was going to happen. Promised that he was headed for a hospital bed, but there was no hospital bed. 24 hours in an ED. Then he got in a hospital bed for 24 hours. I stayed in touch with him throughout this whole period, and he as the shifts changed, doctors came in and out. He was just, and at one point he said something to me that I want to pitch to you. He said, "I don't get it." He said, "The people here are wonderful. They're caring, they're smart, they work hard, but I don't get it. How can such caring, smart, dedicated people be involved in such a terrible experience for me, for a patient? So let's start there, Jess. How does that sound to you? What's your reaction to our friend's question? How can such marvelous people be involved in such terrible care?
You know, it's heartbreaking every time I hear you tell that story and frame it that way, because it's heartbreak on top of heartbreak, because it's not the people. It's the system, it's not the people. The people are trying with everything they've got to make the system a system function that's designed around incentives that are not the best care for him.
You really believe that? They're not slacking
100%.
off? But still things go wrong.
Yeah. So I think the point is that what's the dysfunction there is that the system is designed in a sense to obstruct care, and the frontline clinicians, the people he's interacting with in the emergency room, are not just fighting hard to try to deliver the best care, they're fighting like hell to deliver the best care, but they keep meeting these obstacles from the system. And I think this is a perfect moment to just say, I spent a lot of time with the emergency room folks, so part of the story of our friend is about the time that he's spending in the emergency room. Never, ever have I met a more impressive community of people than the emergency room team at MGH. And I presume this is true all across the country. Those are some of the most dedicated, hardest working, most patient, smartest, extraordinary humans I have ever met. So if they're not producing what we consider to be good care, it's not them. They're not the problem.
Okay, let's do a little searching for the problem. So you and I talked about two images of the problem, money and the system failure itself. And I don't want to go into it, but I'm turning professor for a minute. I want to just talk about financialization in healthcare. And then we'll turn to Jessica's view of it. So these are just random slides I selected showing what this idea of corporatization, financialization, and the change in focus of healthcare look like. From the time I was in training, from the time I was a doctor, we certainly knew there was such a thing as money, but it wasn't like centered in our screens. This is the hospital revenue per discharge, the discharge costs in Massachusetts, our state, between 2013 and 2020. It grew 3 times faster than the rate of inflation. Healthcare confiscating money from every other potential use of that money, including the lives and desires of the population paying that money. We now have health insurance premiums in Massachusetts high enough that over 11 years it's now reached annually the premiums for health care in Massachusetts are more than the price of a decent-sized car. It's not just the system, it's people. The wonderful work by Noam Levy and at the Kaiser Health News, 100 million people in this country, 110 million actually, are saddled with a health debt in our country. No other country comes even close to that. The largest cause of bankruptcy in our country is medical debt. We also know that in other dimensions of quality, I won't go through all of the dimensions, but say patient safety, it has lagged. It has lagged. We have had data for 4 or 5 decades about injuries to patients in care, and the rates of injury are remaining the same. David Bates published this extraordinarily important article in December of 2023 in the New England Journal of Medicine. It showed that the rates of adverse events, injuries to patients in hospitals, 11 hospitals in 2020, were the same as reported in 1984 in the Harvard Medical Practice Study. So injuries are occurring all the time. The behavior of the system doesn't seem oriented strategically around solving these problems. Hospitals remain, thank goodness we have them. I mean, they do amazing work, but they also confiscate money. They use every mechanism they have to get more, while, as we'll hear from Jessica about some of her patients, that money has other potential uses. There is a reaction in the workforce also that we'll get into. Unionization of physicians now appears to be, I just call it a wave in the country, and we're expecting more. So this is what I'm going to mean by context, the financialization part of context. So Jessica, where you're working every day, maybe there isn't a clear answer to this question, but this focus on money, this idea that ownership of care is a profit center. It's a way to grow wealth, concentrate wealth. In the case of private equity, only concentrated wealth. That appears to be the only objective they have. And we're in a country which believes when you orient around markets and concentration of wealth, somehow things get better. Can you talk about that money around you, what your perceptions are?
Yeah, this is a big topic. I think as a hospitalist, I have to start from a place of talking about the capacity challenges in the hospital, which many of you know well. Let me just paint a picture. So that I work in a 1,000-bed hospital. We have an emergency room that at any given time, just the internal medicine team, is taking care of somewhere between 25 to 55, 60 patients who have been evaluated, they've been admitted to the hospital, but there's no bed upstairs for them. So it congests the emergency room. It obstructs the care they are trying to provide down there. This picture I painted for you earlier when we were discussing this, of patient comes in with mild cognitive impairment, with a urinary tract infection, being treated, getting antibiotics, doing just fine, but positioned in a hallway because there's no other space to put her, under the bright lights, and there for 24, 48, sometimes 72 hours. And here we are now, she has florid delirium, requiring pharmacologic and sometimes physical restraints just to keep her safe.
Which she didn't come in with.
She didn't come in with. We gave her that problem. Sorry, it's a microphone. We gave her that problem. She didn't have it. In the meantime, so that's bad enough. And I remember really clearly one of my really dear friends, colleagues, calling me in tears because of how terrible it felt to have to give this woman pharmacologic restraints for her own safety, when what we were treating was the product of our own system. It was all iatrogenesis. So you imagine what this does to the patients, imagine what it does to the families, now imagine what this does to the ED staff. And in the meantime, at that particular day, I was thinking about this. I was playing in the role of medical officer of the day, so responsible for some decisions about sort of who gets admitted where and outside hospital, transfer requests, that sort of thing. And there was a patient who was going to be transferred from the observation unit to an inpatient bed simply because she needed, physical therapy had evaluated her and determined that she needed acute inpatient rehab. She had a bed ready for her at an inpatient rehab facility. She had agreed to go there, but insurance hadn't authorized it yet. And they had 48 hours to make that determination. And because she'd already been in the hospital for 96 hours, instead of staying where she was or going to the acute rehab, which is what she needed, instead she occupied that inpatient medicine bed that the woman in the hallway with evolving delirium can't go to. So that to me is profit is hard for me to point at here, but that system's not designed around what's best for patients or what's most helpful for the clinicians taking care of them. My understanding is that it's money.
If it's money, it's a little, it sounds a little stupid because the sequence you're describing, keeping someone in the hold in the ED, the blockage of a person ready to go out to rehab, who, by the way, was benefiting from the rehab, he was doing rather well, or she was doing rather well, I understand. That costs more money.
Yeah, I'll tell you another story that illustrates this, I think, more clearly. I had another patient who this is a really dramatic version of this, but it illustrates all the things we see all the time. A gentleman, young, healthy gentleman, who really physically very fit, very active, had an excellent job and excellent health insurance in the state of Massachusetts, had a catastrophic bike accident a few months ago. And in that accident, he had intracranial hemorrhages, he had polytrauma, so many broken bones. through the miracle of medicine, he made it through that hospital, that initial hospitalization, and was discharged to an LTAC, long-term acute care. So basically a hospital, as I understand it, a hospital where they can also work on the intensive physical rehab. He makes remarkable gains in that environment, and then he has a little blip, a little bump in the road where he develops a urinary tract infection and sepsis, gets transferred to MGH, goes to the ICU, is on pressors, turns around very quickly, again, the magic of medicine and antibiotics, is called out to my service, and the day I meet him on a Monday, it's clear to me he's medically ready to go back and to continue what he needs most in the world, this aggressive inpatient physical therapy. That's a Monday. I let my team know, we all agree, they let the case managers know. On Tuesday morning, I'm told the insurance will take 48 hours to review it, but that we don't actually think he meets the criteria for LTAC level of care anymore. So I ask if they can screen in parallel. Can you screen at the same time for acute rehab and LTAC? No, that's not how the process works. Okay, fine. So Thursday, the case managers tell me, indeed, they're declining him for LTAC, and the doctor at the insurance company would like to speak to me. I give them my cell phone number. I get a call on Friday morning, calling to let you know he is declined for an LTAC. Okay, we thought this might happen. Can you approve him for acute rehab? That's not the question that was asked of me, so I can't answer that question for you. It has to go back to the screeners. Well, where else would he go? Well, he said, well, I can't answer. I can see why I assume he'll be approved for acute rehab. I just can't make that determination.
Says the doctor.
Says the doctor. I say to him, is there anything I can do here? This is crazy. He's been medically ready since Monday. He said, believe me, I'd also like to get him out of the hospital. It's costing us more for him to be there. Okay, well, at least our interests are apparently aligned. So that's a Friday morning. On Saturday, I learn that the department that reviews the rehab approval is closed for the long weekend. It's a holiday on Monday. So the earliest he'll be approved is on Tuesday. And then this audience in particular will be able to predict the future, which is that he has a terrible adverse event. He falls out of the hospital bed between Saturday and Sunday and suffers another subdural hematoma. By some miracle, his subdural was stable and didn't require intervention, and we were able to discharge him on Tuesday. But that was insanity. That's madness.
It's 8 days in the hospital, costing more money, frustrating you and taking your time, and not meeting the needs of the patient, which were quite obvious.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about incentives. The problem here is that your incentives are not properly aligned. Would pay for performance help here? If we pay you more if you get that guy out of the hospital when he should?
You told me this story about somebody getting an incentive many, many years ago, an incentive program when it was introduced.
Yeah, I got to practice in a really good environment at HMO that I thought gave terrific care, but for some reason, it decided in the wave of pay for performance, value-based payment, early stages of it, to start rewarding us or not rewarding us depending on our performance. And I remember walking by the open door of one of my colleagues, Mark, who was a lovely physician and just great. He was a specialist in lead poisoning, was so proud of it. And Mark was leaning on his head on his hands like that with a piece of paper between his fingers. And I said, "What's up, Mark?" And he held up the piece of paper, which was his $300 bonus check for that quarter for his performance. And he said, "I feel so misunderstood." Comment on that? What do you hear?
I mean, the story is the same, isn't it? The incentive is the care of the patient. If I could do something differently to serve the patient, you think I wouldn't have already tried it? It's no amount of, more money or more retirement compensation or whatever that looks like, that incentive looks like, is gonna make me be able to move a system, to move mountains.
How does it make you feel to be stuck in that
feels great.
Yeah.
I think one thing I've talked to you a lot about is that I think I love this job. I've said I love this job, and it's really true. And I don't know that I could still be doing this job without the community of people who I sit within who really understand it. I have these colleagues who, in particular, a group of 3 women who is a place that I need to go. I need that space.
It's your community of support.
I have many layers of communities of support, but I know that I can always text, call these 3 peers and say, can you believe this? And that they will understand it. That community, in my mind, is absolutely essential.
Are you a fan of this unionization wave?
I think it's a necessity. Fan is a funny word to use because in some sense, I really don't think it's an option. I think if we, I'm not a primary care doctor because I don't know that could be. I think the job is too hard. Right now, we ask the primary care doctors to be responsible for preventative care, for acute care, for chronic disease management, for increasingly complex patients in less and less time. And then we ask them to complete more documentation, and we increase access to them by the patients, which is not, of course, in and of itself a bad thing, it's a good thing. But there are only so many hours in a day, and unionization to me is a necessary, the collective action piece is the only way I understand to counter the forces here, to say, hold on. We're trying to give good care to our patients. We have to come up with ways to make that possible.
Instead of more difficult. Well, I want to move to the culture topic quickly, but let's make one other pause on this topic of substance use disorder, opioid use disorder. We discovered a big difference in context of when I was doing my work and you doing yours. Can you talk about what it's like to be trying to help with opioid use disorders and kind of how the system stuff fits into that picture?
Yeah. I think you all know the scope of the problem at the population level, but treatment of opioid use disorder, sorry. Taking care of individuals with opioid use disorder is a place where the forces things collide and all of the problems in medicine come together to obstruct health. It's a problem that I don't think really existed as it is now in your training. And what I see in sort of concrete ways is young people who should be enjoying the healthiest period of their lives, many of whom have young children and are highly motivated by that or by other reasons to recover. But it's the perfect storm. Money created the problem. Prescription drugs, supported by a profit-oriented system, allowed our society to wreak havoc on people's lives and on their health. And then you layer in mental health disease, structural racism, together with substance use disorder, in a society that wildly undervalues mental health support and treatment and is insufficiently committed to countering the forces of the structural racism.
You told me about the asymmetry in use of buprenorphine. Just maybe you could mention that if you can.
Yeah. So, there's a really effective treatment for opioid use disorder. Now, the studies are really clear about its benefit, life-saving. And these data all come from the CDC website if you're looking for the reference, but according to the CDC, fewer than 1/3 of those who initiate treatment for substance use disorder in the United States receive medication. In 2020, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health estimated 2.7 million adults in the US met criteria for opioid use disorder in the past year, and that excludes people experiencing homelessness, people who are incarcerated, and people who are institutionalized because the survey just didn't capture those groups. And then this has really blew my mind, although I should have known. But in the period of 2012 to 2015, 95% of 13.4 million office visits for buprenorphine were for white people. 5% were for all other racial and ethnic groups combined. This is insanity.
All right. Let's switch topics for a little while. We don't have as much time left as I wish, but so we'll accelerate a bit. But we're going to talk about culture, and that word always has bugged me. It's really important, but it's vague. It's frustratingly so hard to get your hands on. I think culture means the collection of beliefs and norms and habits that, even if they're not articulated, shape our work. Now, in healthcare, some of that culture is consciously taught to clinicians. I remember that. I remember a very formative moment for me, I've mentioned in other speeches, when I was first year medical student, I think first day medical student, it was maybe the first week I was there, we were assigned tutors. And my tutor was a surgeon, Dr. Edward Frank, who taught me to see my first patient with a white coat on. And I walked in, and there was this elderly woman lying in bed. I knew from her that she was scheduled for gallbladder surgery. And so I started to talk. I said, Mrs. Stein, tell me about the pain. When did it start? And Dr. Frank put his hand on my arm and said, Don, when you speak to a patient, you sit down. So I sat down. And ever since I've sat down. And then I began again. So, Mrs. Stein, when did your pain start? And he put his arm on me again. And he said, Don, do you know that Mrs. Stein has a brand new grandson? That's culture being transmitted in such a profound way. It's kind of, I've never forgotten that, obviously. On the other hand, I heard a story from a medical student of mine about another medical student more recently who told me this story. The other medical student had been in the operating room holding a retractor, and his hand started to cramp, and he asked for help. He said he needed a break. Could someone take the clamp? And the surgeon, the head surgeon, replied, I won't tolerate weakness in my OR. Get out. Maya Angelou says people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And it's through that signaling, I think, that the culture gets transmitted. It's your patient, Dr. Berwick. Fatigue is a sign of commitment. It's not a problem. Everybody wanted to be the hero. When I was in training, Dr. Roman DeSanctis was the icon in the hospital, a cardiologist who just seemed to know, he did know everything, it seemed. He famously stepped on an elevator, saw a patient, and said, that patient has secondary syphilis, a diagnosis everyone else had missed. So he was like this genius. Dr. Judah Folkman, an amazing, lovely guy, chief of surgery at Children's. Dr. Folkman was chief resident in a hospital, and famously, it was said that when Dr. Folkman was chief resident for 1 year, he did not leave the hospital for 1 year. These were the legends, always double-edged for me, quite romantic, but I couldn't meet these standards. I forget things. I'm human. I can't do it. And so what it taught me is it's romantic to be a doctor, and I have no business being a doctor because I can't keep up to that. Jessica, you've been thinking a lot about culture. You were formed at a different era from me. You're a teacher, a mentor of a whole new generation. For people here, many of whom are leaders, they know now they're dealing in a multi-generational context. I hear about it. In fact, when we surveyed people for the topic they most wanted to talk about at the forum, workforce was topic number one. By far, nothing competed with it. So reflect on this a bit, this multi-generational challenge we've got, if it's a challenge.
Can you advance the slide to the generations?
Yeah.
So I just definitionally, talk for a second about this, what we're talking about when we talk about generations. And this is, from Wikimedia common users. So this is just one definition, and probably the years vary a little bit depending on what source you're using. But just for reference, when we're talking about, so I'm right at the cutoff of Generation Y. I was born in 1981. It does make me wonder, am I really Generation Y? Am I really that different from my husband, who was born apparently in Generation X? And then Generation Z and Generation Alpha we're also referring to as post-millennials. So this is just a reference point for what we're talking about. And I think generations are useful for the conversation, but I struggle when we talk about a generational divide or a generational gap, because it makes it sound like these different generations have fixed views, have fixed points, and there can be no crossover, intersection, or conversation. But I think the language of generations is useful. Can you go to the next slide? This book, for anyone who's interested in learning more, is, I think, a really terrific sort of background for a description of attributes of Gen Z that I think is, she's an anthropologist, Roberta Katz, and from a sort of anthropological perspective, what has shaped the forces that have shaped Gen Z, and how does that create the attributes that define that generation. It's obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but I think it's a really helpful book for anyone who's looking for ways to understand it. And some of what I'm going to say derives from this book. We had at Medical Education Day at Harvard Medical School recently that I co-chaired, where the theme was this generational thing that's happening, and Dr. Katz came and gave the keynote, and which is wonderful, really, really helpful. So I think there's a lot to unpack, but I think about 4 pieces of this. The first is this purported tension between the generations. The older generation accusing the younger ones of being woke snowflakes, and the younger generation distrusting authority and hierarchical structures. Those are the sort of parodies of it. And it's not that I don't understand where people are coming from. I really do. I think it's just a waste of precious, valuable energy that needs to be redirected. And we need to be empowered to use that energy to make important, critical changes in how our system works. Because as I said before, the community of us and the collective action is key to making those changes, or to at least to advocating on behalf of ourselves and our patients. So it is our job as educators and as a profession to be sure that we have a competent workforce. We have to insist on standards and demonstration of competence, but how we get there and what structures are necessary versus what we require because it's the way we've always done things needs to be really carefully reassessed and reconsidered, recalibrated, and with very active involvement from those who are asking us to trust us as, to quote Dr. Katz in an interview, authors of their education. I just want to call back here this notion that if the system is really financially designed and we're having these accusations that the younger generation just wants to punch in, punch out, they think being a doctor, the profession is a job, not a calling, they're not that committed, they're not that dedicated. If the system is really designed around the finances and it's extractive, it will take and it will take and it will take. So if we don't draw the lines, nobody else will. So I just think it's important to hold on to that idea. The second is that we've talked about, a lot of medicine is the same. There's a lot about it that's the same. There's a lot that's different. The explosion of medical knowledge and the evidence base it's infinite. And this notion of someone who knows everything, which probably, by the way, didn't know everything, but the notion that someone might is now just an absolute fiction. So that influences how we learn, what we need to know and store in our brains, and how we adapt and advance our clinical skills in that context. Related to the vast expansion of clinical knowledge is we now have subspecialists, we have hospitalists. We have to learn to deliver care as clinicians with different areas of deep expertise and know that the patient is best served by the integration of that expertise. The third, doctors now aren't like doctors from your training. We're not all men. Not everyone is white, although too many people still are. Transgender people can be doctors. Some doctors use they, them pronouns. Some doctors have disabilities, some of which are visible and some of which are not. Doctors have different belief systems. And I'm going to make a quick and a really important pivot here to say where we sit in this state. I just want to say out loud that gender-affirming care is healthcare. Women making decisions about their own bodies is healthcare. That diversity that we're talking about leads to better patient outcomes. It makes us better as a profession. It makes us stronger. But it's hard, and hard in some specific ways to those who are currently in positions of power. The last thing I'll say about this, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, is that the institutional and global uncertainty at the moment, I think, weighs on the younger generation of doctors differently than it weighs on you. This is their future, and they will have to actually live in it. That must shape their values, identities, how they think about their lives. And not just in a everything's doomed anyway, we might as well just give up, but in a way that engenders really important innovation, creativity, and draws on sources of hope that will also serve their patients. Those are the sort of 4 components that I pull out of this, having thought a lot and had the opportunity to talk to people about this sort of question of culture shift and the generational shift in medicine.
It's not the same job. We have only a couple minutes left, but I want to tell you about a story about myself to get your consultation. This is a tender story because it's about IHI, and I couldn't love any organization more than I do IHI and the people in it, but I stepped on a landmine in IHI a year or two ago. We depend on our faculty. Our faculty are people who often volunteer their time to be here doing workshops, to be joining us in things all over the world, and some get paid, most volunteer. I was talking about a theme that Maureen and I had purveyed, which is that in order to be successful, we have to, and the word I used was delight our faculty. It produced a firestorm. Not everybody, but within the organization, there was a very strong group of employees who called me on it and said, no, you can't use that word. It's the wrong word. It's freighted with issues of hierarchy, gender, and all sorts of stuff. I really got slammed. My first reaction was totally defensive. Like, what are you talking about? I was trying to raise an issue about our strategy that I think is relatively important. Why are we debating this word? And yet, it was really severe. I don't think it's healed yet, actually. And I was scared and a bit reactive. Help me there. What's the learning in terms of, and it was, I think, multi-generational matter.
Yeah, we had a conversation about this in those famous woods of New Hampshire. And I think what's really important to take away from this is a couple things. First of all, taking it personally, no matter how personal the attack feels, will interfere with your growth. It will limit how much you can listen and learn. The second thing is, it's not about the word delight. I mean, it is, but you have to understand that people are talking about, they're bringing with them a whole accumulation of lived experiences, of life experiences, that inform what it means to bring diversity into the workforce. That's generational diversity among the other kinds of diversity we talk about. So I can understand your reaction, and also the conversation we had in the woods was, you can make 2 choices. You can either dig in and decide, well, they should have been listening to the point you were trying to make. Or you can stop and you can listen. You can just bring your best self, your humility, your curiosity, set aside your pride, and try to understand how to do it better.
We heard that, I think, from Dr. Fauci yesterday in his story about the AIDS activists. Something allowed him to turn around and begin a learning process when any normal person, me included, would have simply been on our heels in reaction. So Jessica, we are out of time, sadly. I want to do a little bit of summarizing here with some lessons that I take away from this conversation. What are you laughing about? Okay, so I'm hearing money is taking over medicine, and that is causing harm. It's harm Jessica lives in but can't stop. Systems need redesign, duh, that's IHI. And someone has to be responsible for that, but it's foolish to say Jessica's responsible for that. She's responsible for acting on her devotion to the healing process, but someone else needs to be responsible, and that's not just rhetorics. If no one is responsible for making it possible for that man to get back to LTAC, or for the SUD patient to get the mental health care that they need, if no one is responsible, nothing will happen. We need to learn better how to celebrate the abundance that's creating conflict among us in society and in healthcare, and any vocabulary of blame stands in our way. So here's 5 lessons I'd leave with. One is, the only thing Jessica and I can come up with is stupid rules are stupid. If you have a rule base, a payment base, any base that keeps that man from getting into his LTAC the day after he's ready to go, everyone loses. And we need to interrogate the system of rules and habits and norms, and no, I can't do that, and this is not my department, or we're trapping ourselves. We're reducing waste in a society that can't tolerate that kind of waste. If you want a test case, pick substance use disorder. I wish if I could wave a wand, we would have a national campaign or effort or intention, just like we had to get to the moon, that we're going to nail this one. There's too much suffering, and we are not organized around solving that problem. But we could. We listen to the experts, we'll know the answers, and we have to carry them out. The third is responsibility. I guess the most frustrating thing for me now at this stage of my career is to so clearly identify the kinds of barriers and problems that Jessica's talking about, systems issues. I want to call them somewhat sterilely, we mean that guy can't get back to LTAC. That's what it means. And no one owns it. Jessica owns it in I would say, beating her head against many stone walls with all the generosity she could bring to bear, all the focus on healing. But if there's no one saying, it's on me now, I'm going to make the stupid rule go away. I'm going to organize trajectories, journeys for people that meet their needs. It won't happen. And I cannot find still the source of ownership. I cannot find someone to stand up, at least in this country, and say, I own it, we will fix it. Jessica, thank you for what you're trying to do. On the multi-generational front, I've learned a lot from preparing for this session with Jessica. She has pointed out this pervasive misunderstanding, especially about generations, that these, what would you call them, snowflakes?
Woke snowflakes.
Woke snowflakes. Couldn't have thought of that one. But it's a deep, deep misunderstanding. Our values may have migrated a little bit apart in some ways, but our mission is not. We share it. We share the mission. And if we just ought to give up this blame and finger-pointing vocabulary, it isn't going to work. We have to discover each other. And that is the final main point, which is there's only one way to do that, and that is to listen, to listen. Kedar, in his opening remarks to the forum this time, said somehow the forum has a mysterious through line every time we meet. The through line this time, I think, is listen. Listen. My wife, Jessica's mother, told me a couple of weeks ago something I think I'll credit her with the invention, but she said there's the 3 most important words in the world in the arena of interpersonal relation and helping are these: tell me more. We heard that from Kedar Mate when he's talking about trying to understand Bodhi's suffering and finding a way to help Bodhi that allowed Kedar to listen differently. We heard it constantly from Maureen and the What Matters to You theme, and we heard it from Tony Fauci as he overcame his own initial instincts to listen to the AIDS community, to listen to the skeptics about science and find ways to listen. So as simple or even hokey it is, I think that's my takeaway. We gotta learn to listen. first. Tell me more. At the systems level, I do want to say one thing, which is we've heard about system breakdowns from Jessica, what it's like to be a good-hearted, highly capable worker in that system who only wants to heal, and the system's in the way. We can't afford to squander what this workforce brings to it, which means someone's got to say, I will fix this broken thing. So my assignment for you is pretty simple. Find a broken thing. Find a broken system. And for whatever level of authority you're at, fix it. Don't delegate it, don't admire it, don't apologize to it, don't explain it, fix it. If we could get that dynamic going, then Jessica get the work done that she badly, badly wants to do. Jessica, thank you so much. I've got one more request for you before we finish. Can you ask me, would I rather be helped or heard or hugged?
Now or in
right
general?
Now.
Would you like to be helped, heard, or hugged, Dad?
Hugged.
Okay. You got it.
Thank you, sweetie.
Thank you. I love you. Yeah, you too.